It's a great pleasure to have today, and somewhat unusual, but I'm very much convinced, interesting theoretical biophysics seminar. It's actually by an artist who actually walked the line both on the scientific side and on the artistic side, Julian Voss-Andreae. Since he's an artist, naturally I approached him as an artist and looked at his website and saw some marvelous art that is clearly doing the communication between science and art. I don't know how many of you saw it. Maybe he will show it us a little bit. I, for example, refer to his wonderful sculpture, The Quantum Man. And then jumping forward to his most recent work, I see him struggling with sculpting biomolecules. Most recently, actually, something that came from our group, namely showing in some wonderful series of sculptures how proteins fold. And now, Julian comes from a different continent almost, namely the continent of art, even though he was a physicist at one point, he was trained at one. And it reminds me very much of my own situation. I come from a family of people where there was no scientist inside. My brother is actually also professor of architecture. My cousin is professor of German languages, both of them quite famous in their ways. The other part of the family are all lawyers and business people. So when I wanted to communicate with them about my field, I really had to struggle. And however, I felt always that I had this bug or the genes of an artist in me, because actually there were quite a few artists in my family. My sister, for example, worked for the German TV. But I'm sort of like a poet without tongue, or a musician or a painter without hands. I have this enormous desire to express myself as a scientist beyond just the scientific facts, but somehow I never could do it. Recently, actually, I was very fortunate that my friend Olga Swinarski helped me to do the art part of my scientific thinking, but I sort of need another person to get it out. And this struggle sort of is with me, and I very much appreciate that somebody is trying to do it. And so I don't know if we really come from different ways, because on one side you also know Julian, you also know science. But I really feel there's a struggle. It's not trivial, but there's something to be said. And I'm so glad to see that some people actually can say it. In your case, you show it, you sculpture it. And so I'm very eager to meet you as a person. I just see you for the first time in reality. And we are here at Beckman like normal scientists, but we also try to be sort of a little bit more encompassing. Maybe at an institute, for example, that combines engineering and science is sort of a little broader than just a normal science. And we also would really very much like to integrate other things, like photography. We are ourselves using graphics methods in science. We would like to maybe go over the bridge to the human side of art. And so that you come here means a lot to me, and I also know that my feelings that I just expressed is shared by my young colleagues. And so we hope on one side to learn about your path from the science to the art. And we also hope very much that there will remain some kind of contact between us, because there might be something we can actually do together. So then you're my tongue, you're my hands, and maybe also we one day can have a piece of you here at Beckman. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm looking forward to your lecture.
Thank you very much. I'm honored and very happy to be here. And this morning alone, I learned more than probably usually in a month or two. I had some fascinating talks, and I noticed what you're talking about is really incredible. I've been to several research institutes, and I've never seen anything even close to this here, where people have such a focus on the outreach part of it, and on basically transcending the object-subject divide and bringing it back to the people, to the human being, what has been analyzed in science. What you said with your family remind me actually of my own family. Mostly kids who want to study art get into trouble that they should do something proper. And in my case, it was the other way around. I was actually painting in my youth, and when I decided to study physics, my parents tried to talk me out of it and said, that's not a good idea, and why would you do such a thing that's such a dry thing like physics? I mean, who would want that? So it's kind of the other way around. So let me talk about this path. How did I, go? What was my path, which was actually a pretty unusual one. I got interested in physics, especially because I was fascinated with the weirdness of quantum physics. Basically, I really wanted to find out what is it that we can't find out ultimately and fundamentally about the world. What is it that we can't make consistent pictures? So this experiment, you all probably know, it's the establishment of light as a wave. And the other way around, later people figured out that particles also have wave properties. So you can do the same experiment as this one with electrons, with atoms. And in 1999, I was fortunate enough to participate in my graduate research in Vienna, Austria, in an experiment that does the same thing, only with buckyballs, which are by far the heaviest and the hottest objects to ever exhibit this kind of behavior. Keep in mind what's happening when the quantum object travels through this double slit setup. It does that as a wave. So what you measure as one buckyball at the end actually travels through both openings at the same time. That's the reason why you see interference patterns. So it doesn't get stranger than that, really. So what we detect as one was at two different spots. These slits are apart about 100 times the diameter of a buckyball, 100 nanometers. So then, after this experiment was done, we were looking in this group into expanding the experiment. We wanted to go towards sending a philosopher through the double slit. But the next step was we thought maybe a virus that looks like a buckyball and seems simple enough, because we have, of course, as physicists, no clue about biology. And so I realized there's a thing called protein. And then I met this girl from America, and I asked, she was a neuroscientist, and she's sitting right there, by the way. And I asked her, what is a pretty simple protein that I can image easily? And she said, have you tried GFP? I have no idea what GFP is, of course. So Adriana, my wife now, and mother of 4 children in the meantime, has a background in neuroscience, and she used the GFP to label neurons in mouse brains, the usual thing, cut them apart, look at them. Anyway, so I looked at this image, and I felt I was completely floored by that thing. And the reason is I found like a missing link between the bodies, our macroscopic bodies, and the molecules we talk about in physics, the small hydrogen and the small water, the stuff that's constructivist and mathematical in nature, versus the organic. So this one's right in between, and I thought that was very cool. But shortly after that, I decided I follow her to the United States, stop physics, and study art, but with a totally open mind. I just wanted to do art, basically, and I thought I would forget about science. So one of the first assignments, I don't need to mention to you guys where the GFP is from, right? And that, by the way, is a piece of transgenic art. That's a bunny with GFP. So one of the first assignments in sculpture class was to take a piece of square lumber and apply compound mitered cuts. So that way, it's a very elegant way of going from 1 dimension to 3 dimension by reassembling it. So that kind of principle here. And when the critique session was on and everybody presented their artworks, one guy had made this tiny ball out of this huge piece of lumber, a tiny ball, totally like a globulin kind of protein. And I thought, man, that reminds me of something. And I thought of those proteins I looked at a few months before that, thanks to you in this research there with the Buckyballs and the extension of it. And so I decided to find out about proteins, to find out if there's data available of the coordinates, and then write software that would allow me to transform the coordinates of the backbone into instructions to do miter cut sculptures of this protein. So that's how it all started. And then when I give this talk to artists, I usually show this here, how a physicist, how a chemist, and how a biologist looks at proteins, and then that's the equivalent for an artist. That's the computer rendition with my early software, and this is then my very first protein sculpture in wood. So, and then I said, okay, now I'm ready to do a GFP. Then this one I made, and then that one, and it turned out it was so complicated that I ended up making a big mess. But the nice thing about being an artist is, you could take this mess and put it in the gallery on the floor and write failed protein biosynthesis and call it art. So I did that instead of building a sculpture. Later on, I was able to pull this off. I learned how to weld because otherwise I couldn't pull it off structurally. And then the slide doesn't advance. And then a few years later, I made this piece for the University of Washington for the Friday Harbor Labs. That's the place where in the 60s GFP was discovered. And then one of my first projects after protein things where I realized there's this thing called alpha helix, and I could make it a lot easier because those are all the same modules, basically. So I made this one out of trees, and this one, and I realized, wait a minute, I make alpha helixes. They were discovered by Linus Pauling, who's from Oregon, and I make it in the Oregon state tree, which is the Douglas fir. So I was looking for people who might be interested in commissioning me, for a sculpture like that. The tree didn't work out, but there's Linus Pauling. That's his alpha helix. He, by the way, is the only person to ever win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes, and he's from Portland. That's pretty great, I think. And then as part of my thesis project, I took a big steel beam, this one here, cut it up into 15 pieces. Here I am welding, until I figured out that the ceiling actually wasn't high enough to do the piece. So I had at the last minute moved to a different studio, and then that's the piece that resulted from it. It's a 15 amino acid alpha helix out of a 12 by 12 inch steel beam powder coated, and that's in front of his childhood home in Portland. Then I graduated at that point, and I got into laser cutting. I realized I could pull off much higher accuracy, and I could do much more complex pieces if I use laser cutting instead of error-prone hand cutting and hand measuring. So I got a little carried away. I made a collagen and emphasized the structural aspects of it. And then another project, an earlier project where I was intrigued by hemoglobin, another famous protein. I always thought that would be such a cool thing. And then, of course, it's made out of steel, which is mostly iron. So I thought it would be nice to make it out of weathering steel and see what happens after I install it. So as you can tell, what's happening is essentially the same as when we breathe. Iron binds to oxygen. Then I made a piece for Roderick McKinnon. He is the guy who got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2003 for discovering the potassium channel. And so he asked me to make this potassium channel after I talked with him about a possible commission, which didn't work out, but I got to meet him, and so he ended up commissioning me for this piece, which was very fun and really interesting. And I read a lot about the science behind it, which is absolutely intriguing. This wire thing represents the empty cavity, and these spots here that are slightly thicker are the points where the ions stay when they hop in single file through the ion channel. And then here, this is I'm talking about now about the probably the largest and most complex protein piece I've done. That was a commission for the Scripps Institute, the new campus in Florida, and the task was to come up with a sculpture based on the antibody molecule, the human antibody. And there's an interesting protein database file which basically uses structural data from crystallography, and the hinge region is modeled on the computer, and that's this composite model. And I was supposed to use this, and then I played with it. I superimposed it for fun on Leonardo's man, and I realized that's like such a beautiful fit, and it fits so well, not only in proportions, which I didn't distort to do this, but also in function, of course. You know, they're the arms and they're the fingers, so the man's antibody corresponds with man's body, basically. And so I designed it like this. I basically took the man out of the equation and put those rays in there to kind of, you know, allude to religious, spiritual imagery, and also structurally it really helped. So here and then, so one thing is to invent the structure and to come up with a design, but the other thing is, of course, to pull it off in reality, and that took actually a long time. The protein alone, there you see it stacked up, took the better part of a year, and there we are welding the ring out of laser cut pieces. And that was the way to pull it off in 3 dimensions. I basically took the image from it's the front view, glued it on a big stage. This is 12 feet by 12 feet, 3 meter 20 or something. Yes. Oh no, 370. And then I put those pieces of square 4 by 4 in there on cut to different heights. So there were specific points where I knew the 3rd dimension is taken care of. So I was able to stack it at the right place. And then with a plumb line, I could measure the other 2 dimensions, matching it to the image. And here's the image in my studio. 12 feet diameter is the ring. And here it is installed in Florida. That's this new research institute there. But if you have questions, by the way, please feel free to just ask. That's my favorite thing of doing it.
I learned how to weld to build telescope structures.
Yeah.
And seeing your cross sections all welded together, the thing that immediately occurs to me is how much time and energy you must have spent to grind off the bead on every single.
It's a very good observation. It's insane, and it's even more insane if you think that this is not only normal stainless. This is actually 316 alloy, which is much worse.
Oh, that's all stainless.
Yeah, 316 stainless.
I work
it's
with
very
aluminum, not with stainless
yeah,
steel. So yeah.
That's pretty easy. Yeah. No, that
so
actually that's why it takes so long.
Do you spend more time doing that than you do everything else then?
No.
No?
No, because I can find people who can grind.
Ah, okay.
The other stuff I can't outsource.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's true, it took a
That's
long time.
a mind-boggling amount of effort just to finish the piece after you've built it.
Yeah. You have to be smart about the order how you do it, because you can't get in there anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you designed this all in the computer first in 3D.
Yes.
Did you use that in some way to get accurate miter cuts? Is that how you get the
Yes,
angles
exactly.
correctly?
In fact, it's not really miter cuts. What I do is fake miter cut. I take sheet, because that's the easiest to laser cut. And then I cut one segment in 4 portions with hinge regions, which I cut. So they're very thin, so we can just take one piece out. It comes with laser etched numbers on each side which corresponds to the next amino acid, basically, the next peptide unit. So I know it's like a puzzle. I assemble it. I bend it into the square shape, then weld it shut on all 4 edges, then clean it up, and then take those pieces and assemble them. Welded on 2 of the miter cut edges. The interior one is open. There's lots of technical stuff in there. I mean, for example, this backbone structure is in different thicknesses, depending if it's structurally important and goes through, or if it's like just icing, decorative. So it looks the same, but it's different thicknesses. Same with the ring. It has a different thickness of steel here than there. Several things like this. Okay, so let's go back to the Buckyballs. That was also, of course, interesting to me. Here's an old picture by Leonardo. It's the oldest image we have of the buckyball structure, truncated icosahedron it's called. And I'm showing it because the very first piece I made out of art school was this one. It's out of bronze. And I realized when I cut out the faces, I could make a new one out of the cut out parts, right? So I did that, and then I can do it again, and I can do it again. And I did it 4 times and nested them into each other. And I find it beautiful, not only aesthetically, but also because it actually echoes the mathematical structure of the buckyball seen as a quantum wave, because it's a spherical wave with concentric spheres as wave fronts.
Have you ever seen an object called a Turner's cube?
No.
I'll show you a picture on the phone.
I'm always interested in cool structures.
Yeah.
So this buckyball is like 2 feet diameter, and then I made bigger ones. That's at that time my 3-year-old helping me with making a really big one. That first version we started on the ground, as you can see, and then tried to build up. I designed it such that it would fit right through over a big branch to behold. That was the theory. In practice it turned out that it would actually be so heavy that the steel would go like this and it wouldn't fit. And I almost broke my back to get this thing installed, but I did at the end. But the second time around I was smarter. I built this huge scaffolding that's 40 feet by 40 feet by 40 feet. This is like a private person's yard. There's a creek under here, and they commissioned me to install this piece in their yard, basically. And what I did is I installed it around 3 big Douglas firs and hooked them up so it hangs free in the air. That's the view from below. And you can see the quantum message is there. You know, you have objects that don't have a clear-cut boundary. They start to intersect, and stuff, just interesting stuff happens, which you wouldn't have thought about. Even you can think, okay, I make a buckyball structure, but then these things happen, and that's the fun thing about art, that these unexpected, beautiful things appear. Quantum waves. This is a famous experiment from '93, where people at the IBM Institute took single atoms and pushed them with a scanning tunneling microscope on a surface, and then they pushed them in a circle, as you can see in the sequence. And what you see here is actually the shared electron matter wave. So that's really one of the few instances where in physics you can see this spooky and weird matter wave directly, or something like this, really.
Quantum corral, they call it.
That's right, the quantum corral. That's the name of it, because it corrals this electron in there. Yeah, that's right. Well, I changed the name slightly to the well when I made it, after calling quantum corral, but because I'm walking this fine line between art and science, quantum corral is just not going to do it. So, and honestly, it looked like a well to me, because it has this water quality. This is milled out of a piece of wood and then gilded with leaf gold. That was for a show in Maryland for the American Institute for Physics. And here's the piece you mentioned. Here it's installed in downtown Seattle. It's basically the idea, what would happen if I'm the quantum object? Like basically the kind of mindset we had back then when we looked about what we could do to send the philosopher through the slit. And what happens is, if you walk in a certain direction, then quantum physics-wise, corresponds to the center of gravity in classical physics will be a wave function that has wave fronts that are perpendicular to the direction of movement. And I thought that was a really neat image, and I wanted to convey that and make a walking guy out of wave fronts, out of slices of steel. And the intriguing thing that happened is that's a big version in Seattle, in Bellevue, is that he disappears. When you look from the side, he's solid from one side, and then you go by him, and then he disappears like this. And that fits really well again, with the idea in quantum physics. You have one quantum reality, and we are incapable of finding a consistent way of looking at it. We have one way, the wave, and the other way, the particle. In math, we can do this, and it's a consistent description, but we can't get it into our head as one holistic image that makes sense and captures everything.
What's impressive about you is that every other person would have made no industry out of it, made thousands of quantum men all over the world, but you just made very few.
Well,
really spectacular.
Thank you. It's I've made some. I made an edition of 6 actually of the 8-foot version, and then I made a second one of the big ones. So and they were good for me, because that really gave me money to play with stuff. Okay, so it's not an industry.
But you evolved beyond this one wonderful idea.
Yeah.
Go to your evolutionary kind of mind, as opposed to finding a place where you can make money.
Yeah, that's my hope. I mean, I want to stay, fresh. Otherwise, it would be boring.
I was going to say that a lot of artists, I think they strive to be creative enough that, like you say, they don't have to have a signature one thing that they do. They like to, like you're saying, they try to invent new things as much as they can.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's those kinds.
Yeah.
Then the female counterpart of him. This is the first version, more classical, and then I spaced it more, cut out the slice in the center, and
the wave function of the women horizontal.
That's a very good question. Well, he's the guy who does the earth, right? He navigates this sphere, and she connects the heavens with the earth. You know, that's the direction. There you go. That's the interpretation. And then that's the reason I'm here, I guess, and that's the piece you mentioned. This is in DePaul University in Indiana. That's the sequence of the four stages of this folding of the villain headpiece. Here's another view. We made that. I actually didn't really, I welded only one day on those. The students and the faculty, a science teacher and an art teacher, did this together. And I went there, got them started, and taught them the process, and then they made it and we installed it together a little later. So that was
so there you got really scientists and artists together.
What?
You
Yes,
really
exactly.
do
And
together.
science and art students too. That was the mix. The crew was mixed too. So it was actually very fun. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's another view. That's the what do you call it?
So
Native.
why is only one red and the other one not?
Because the biochemistry teacher chose the colors. We had this argument like a long time. I said, look, if it goes lower in energy, it becomes more real. So I think it should start cloudy and foggy and grayish and unsaturated and become saturated. That was my feeling. He's like, no, the end has to be gray and it should start primary. And at the end I was like, okay. It's not that I insist, because that was really their piece. They made it, and I didn't want to, push my will into this. So then starting with the Quantum Man and Woman, I made a series which is basically from this year, this last year, but the next images I show are from this year, where I take the human body essentially as experimental data and turn them one way or the other into sculptures. In this case, I have concentric rings all connected with spiraling sets of screws. There are 1,200 screws involved. And it makes an interesting effect when you go closer.
The pattern inside us, the screws that hold the plates together.
Yes, exactly. They're basically spacers with a thread inside, and then they're countersunk, so screw on top, screw on bottom, and there are about 600 of those spacers with 2 screws each. And they spiral through, and what happens is because of there's 2 sets of rings on each stage, is that you see those moire patterns. So when you approach her, she kind of like does the black and white thing.
When you design something like the last one,
Yeah.
How do you conceptualize what you want? I mean, clearly you don't go seat of the pants just going to a milling machine and
No,
boring holes.
that's a good question. In this case, I had a model who was pregnant, and I thought, I need to scan her because I really wanted that. Then I didn't like how it looked, and I had several other pieces I made based on this pregnant body. And in this case, I stretched it by 8% because it looked better. I don't know how to express it, but it's like that was just better. And then I basically cut it up and designed blindly the position of these things. It was kind of a structural idea that started it.
This was only the computer?
No, it was never 3-dimensionally, this one in the computer. The others will be, but this one I didn't. I had it only in 2D, slice by slice. And what I did, I spaced one screw as close to the other one as possible, because otherwise you get a lot of flex, and they will do this and fall over. And she actually did that too, so that's why she has seams here, which provide tension. I had to do this, otherwise she wouldn't be sturdy enough. So basically, this one was designed blind, this one not. This
You
one was
didn't even know the moire effects on that one until it was...
No,
built.
exactly. That's
It
the other
was-
point. I was going to
That's what
mention
I was
that. I had
really
no
leading to,
idea.
is
That
whether
came
or not-
later, and I was like, oh wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, I was wondering
Yeah.
if you had visualized the pattern that they would make the screws,
No.
or if that was something you
At
got.
that stage,
from
I
the
didn't know how to do it. Now I'm a little more knowledgeable about rendering and stuff like
Uh-huh,
this. So I
uh-huh.
think I could probably pull it off by now. But you learn. So
Well, even doing a model in the computer is hard work.
I know. Yeah.
Even without building anything, just designing it would be a
Yeah.
tremendous effort.
It's an interesting line though. You're walking there too, because art needs the accident. It's almost impossible to make art that stays alive and wonderful if you totally birth it in your brain. It just doesn't work for some reason. It's really important to open the door to something what most artists call accident, or what has to bring something new in. And I try to stay open, even though I use the computer, and it tends to be deterministic and algorithmic what I'm doing.
So you think that makes it more organic?
Yes, it gives it a spark that it wouldn't have otherwise, very often.
Interesting.
So this piece, is based on how solids are represented in the computer for the most part as a what they call a triangle soup. In this case, I condensed it to only 600 triangles. Those are all laser cut and etched as well. And I figured out that's the test piece for that technique. Oh, the other side's not in there. Okay, never mind. So and then I went back to the idea with the slices, and I made a series of 2 pieces with a guy standing. And I was really interested in this idea that he would disappear when you look at him. And he has a female counterpart too, which I call Sphinx or reclining nude, or she has a bunch of different names, and I'm not totally sure which one to use. But that's her. And these last 2 pieces I intend to make in much larger for a public commission. So I think that's pretty much the last slide, isn't it? Yes, it is. All right, there we go. Any questions?
Okay, there are lots of questions. So I think, so let's first thank so that was very lively, and yeah, so the main question I have thought of is just what I described before. I want to get things out, and the question is for me, you know, how your art might relate to what we are doing.
Yeah.
Probably the only way to find out is that we actually sit in front of a monitor, we show there what we presently simulate that might throw a spark. Yeah, maybe that's a good discussion point to start. So let's say we are the scientists and you are the artist, scientist. Okay, how do we best get together to find if there is some common ground, if there is something exciting between us that could lead to some sculpture?
Yeah.
How is that process sort of done, maybe nicely?
I mean, I think that's what we're doing right now. Like what I learned this morning was all like really intriguing stuff, and I think there's lots of potential for collaborations of different kinds.
So you see what we have, what scientists do, and that flares up. The scientists just show what they have, like pretty innocent, naive, and some of it just gets a spark with you.
Yeah, or the other way around. I mean, you guys know how I work to this point, you know, and if you have ideas, I'm very interested in hearing the ideas.
For example, in the case of the folding, you had actually a series of sculptures.
Right.
Whereas most of the other things, maybe all, I don't know the word for that, is more like one piece.
Right.
But here you had sort of, you transcended it maybe a few times, or the first time, by having now a collection that shows a process in time through a series of statues.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very natural way of doing it. And I had an idea this morning when you told me about the 80 amino acid piece that you boil and cook and then let go again. That'd be natural to make that in a circular arrangement, you know, native state versus the worst, you know, denatured state, and then it goes around the circle. That's basically what you do.
Fold it and then refolding and
Right.
fold again.
Like one piece of art possibly could be, or one inspiration for art could be virus capsids. Virus capsids can be both beautiful. They have an icosahedral symmetry, they have a high degree of symmetry, very, very intricate, but then still very orderly, on the other side very scary. Because
That was
some
what I
of
was
the
gonna use.
famous diseases are connected with it. Like we work, for example, on the HIV virus capsid at the moment.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, it looks beautiful.
Right.
And we talk about things like a productive infection, because certain capsids are really good at it, even though we realize we talk about, you know, human fatalities at the same time.
Yeah,
So
that's
here we
something
have the connection between beauty and nightmare.
That'd be like looking at a highly polished atom bomb, yes?
No, but I mean, I think that's inherent in science, and I think
Yeah.
especially when art and science collide, it's almost unavoidable that this double-faced nature of science, you know, we reduce and we analyze and separate, and we have wonderful things like iPhones. At the same time, you know, there kids in Nevada who remote control airplanes around the world 8,000 miles to kill people, you know. So that's this is we kind of, it feels to me that we are so good at internalizing this paradigm of reductionism that we strip ethics off our, you know, short-term kind of goals. And I think that science is very seductive in that respect, and I think that is a very powerful double-facedness.
Or full of another one that also has an extra dimension inside from what you see to more than that, and that is a ribosome. The ribosome is central to all living cells. There's no living cell without it, and that basically reads genetic information and turns it into protein that the cell needs. Now the interesting thing about the ribosome is, it is really a message from life long, long ago, when we had something what was likely an RNA world, not the world we have it today. And basically the only connection point is this central machine, a reading machine of genetic information, turning it into proteins that we have in our cells. So in a way we have some kind of intellectual fossil that connects us, you know, billions of years into the past, but is also present as a machine that chunks every day in our own cell. And so here we have sort of like a fossil that is still doing modern work, like, you know, real important fast car that, however, is billions of years old.
I've been thinking about, ribosomes are really daunting because they're so big, but I've been thinking about viruses. I have a capsid, a protein virus capsid which I made as sculpture, which I didn't show, but well, that was a bronze cast piece. And I thought it was intriguing to use this ancient technology of bronze casting, basically whipping out same copies, you know, since we do this for thousands of years, and that's what a virus essentially does, stamping out copies. Viruses, yeah. Also this image of these World War II underwater mines, you know, started with these receptors to
like
see.
viruses.
Poliovirus has a stunning similarity to
like
one of those mines.
Exactly, and the half, you know, hidden under sand, rusty, I think would be pretty scary.
Does anybody else have some kind of spiritual connection to some of the molecules or things we have in life?
Yeah, one of the things I was going to mention I thought was interesting when I saw the sculptures you did of the quantum mechanical man with the connections between the plates. What those reminded me of are very sophisticated, highly dense circuit boards in some supercomputers are produced by compressing a bunch of, you know, to get them in the smallest possible space. They're liquid cooled, they're immersed in special fluid, and the circuit boards are packed so tightly that they have three-dimensional pins that connect them to make the wires shorter.
Right.
And to make them run faster. When I saw the side view of the sculpture, reminds me of looking at those old Cray supercomputers where they did these things.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, you have a background in computer science, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, my background is physics. My association was, of course, Feynman path integral formalism of quantum physics. You know, you basically randomly go through the time slices and add them all up and arrive at the right probabilities for quantum physics. But it's fun, it's an interesting situation.
Yeah, we also have quantum biology. So here in this group, also at the university, we work a lot on quantum biology, vision. The most important sense, or the famous sense of vision, is connected with quantum processes, because it involves absorption of light by electrons, pure quantum process, then also the very, very fast and high sensitive reaction that happens in our eyes is really guided by quantum physics. Another one is photosynthesis, where we utilize light energy. There we also have a lot of coherence that comes from quantum physics that guides the initial part of how actually nature harvests the sunlight to rake it in and turn it into some energy form useful for the cell.
Yeah, I made a light harvesting complex, but I didn't show it again because I'm not used to showing those images. But it was basically this big, all 18 2 times 9 subunits, and what I did, because of my wife's inspiration, she had this idea we put a candle in the center and put it in a small room in the gallery, so it would cast shadows of those membrane alpha helixes, which looked like plants, like living plants on the walls. So it was like basically reversed. You know, usually you have the plants palpable and you can touch them, and the biochemistry is this weird thing that you have just an idea about. And here it was kind of the other way around. You could touch the biochemistry, and the plants were the ghostly kind of part.
So the structure of the light harvesting complex was actually solved here.
Oh, really?
Here on this floor.
I had no idea.
In 1996, 97.
Thanks for the data.
And we saw it for the first time. And that's another one is how birds navigate. It's also the protein that,
yes, in the
that
eye.
helps them.
Yeah.
It is a cryptochrome in the eye, a blue receptor, a blue light receptor. That also still puzzling people. So scientists still work on it, how do the birds really manage to detect the very weak magnetic field of Earth, the orient themselves in it. Or also people today think that the sense of smell is also done in a quantum mechanical fashion.
Yeah. It doesn't seem surprising, right? I mean, it just seems awfully weird to think of your brain and the wonderful things we can do as a classical computer. I would be so surprised if there wasn't critically involved quantum phenomena.
Yeah, for the sensory processes, it's sort of, you are right, it's sort of not too surprising because our senses are actually, compared to what you can measure in a physics lab, actually very impressive. It's not like, oh, this is just human, what the physicists do there is so much better. No, it's the other way around. Yeah. So we have, our eyes are really good light detectors that rival most of the equipment in the good physics labs. And our noses are really also excellent in detecting odorants at low concentrations. The measure the Earth's magnetic field is basically with molecules, with magnets that are so tiny that you cannot see them anymore, is also very impressive feat. And so our senses have to be really good, and quantum physics is one of the most sensitive processes that you find in nature that can be easily perturbed and thereby is very sensitive. So it's not too surprising. But it all touches the ground in the organism through molecules, through the kind of molecules you show here, like the green fluorescent protein you see there. Those are the kind of molecules involved in the senses.
Yeah, maybe light. We don't really know that yet.
Yeah.
Maybe photons play a much bigger role than one thinks.
Having some kind of statue of a light harvesting complex would be
I have an idea.
Good. You have an idea.
I think Stonehenge, you know, like basically Stonehenge looks like a light harvesting complex. And I was always thinking it would be so cool to make it golden. You know,
to make it what?
Golden.
Golden.
Like
yes.
the alchemic element of sun. You know,
Okay.
so it could be gold plated, I guess. It doesn't need to be massive. But like life size, you can walk in it. You know, so you are like the size of the pigment there. Maybe the pigment could be like colored glass or something.
Okay. Yeah. Sort of like to make it human size,
Yeah.
so that you basically need it. You shake almost hands
Exactly.
with it.
Yeah, because you have to
I
thank
think
this
it's
guy,
an
right?
important thing.
We get all our food and everything from those.
Yeah, but also, you know, like when you make it human size, it's sort of like it's your partner. You
Right.
can sit, you
Right.
can touch it. That means it is now at your level. It's part of you. Whereas if you make it so small for huge, then it's not you anymore. Yeah, it's also, of course, science. Here, the real one is real small. But you bring it to the level that you partner with it, and thereby you develop some kind of intellectual. So you know, you also say sort of like you depend so much on it. I don't know how I should call that relationship. Maybe almost like a gratitude relationship. The nature that it makes this protein, because it basically feeds the whole biosphere. 95% of the energy of the whole biosphere comes from capturing sunlight that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'd be in order to be thankful.
Yeah, so that, there we could have some kind of artistic, scientific debate, what you want to express, also how you form it, and so on. And it would be almost like for me, like you're making a sculpture of my mother, my late mother. I would not let you do everything. So since this is my protein, I would probably be also a little protective more than you think. Maybe the guy is a little loony.
So I understand that statues generally don't move, but I've been really excited by the way how, as a viewer moves around some of your statues, they change. Right. Have you ever given thought to the idea of statues that do move, kinetic sculptures? A lot of the proteins are kind of clockwork-like, and you can see how you might make 4D cartoons out of moving crankshafts, things connected by gears, and there's so many ways to connect it.
That sounds really hard. Fundamentally unelegant about sculpture you have to plug in, and that breaks down.
There's always hand cranks. But
yeah, I mean, if it's wind, for example, that'd be totally good. And there are people who make beautiful pieces using wind. There's a guy in Netherlands who makes these called strand beasts, beach beasts, which walk in the crazy ways, huge things over the beach. That is awesome, I think. But I have not come up with an idea that I liked enough to make it.
It reminds me of Daniel Hillis. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's had an interesting career. He's a computer architect at one point, but then he got into art, and now he's head of Disney's one of their labs. And one of the projects he was involved with was trying to design how could you build a clock that would work for 1 million years, and you without being attended by a human to wind it and those things. And that reminds me of what you were saying. And they talk about, I read an article that he wrote that talked about how difficult it is to do anything like that, even a simple sculpture. Forget about a clock. What has anybody ever done that's like that? And that's interesting.
That clock is all based on the shape of the cog, and one of the guys who did that cog is in town here, and they made this subtle cog that does 1 million years of time. Yeah.
I don't believe that.
No, there's an equation about planets and day length built into the cog, and it's just a very special shape, and the clock is all based around this. It looks like a double weird curvy pyramid thing. That's how the clock works.
There is a molecule that looks like a bicycle.
Well, of course,
He's our head of bicycling in town.
Yeah. Well, the planetary gears of internal gear hubs are great, and of course ATP synthase with its central crank and its rotating parts around that, which reminds me a little bit of that. And that's a torque-driven, multi-part cyclic molecule. What's that?
Yeah, it's a wheel.
Much like a wheel, yeah, or like a Wankel engine in ways that works through it. It's kind of like two connected motors, one with a rotary crankshaft on the top. There's a wheel on the bottom, and 3 business ends on the top that fire in part. That would be, that's one of the, that can make a fine mechanical cartoon out of that in all kinds of ways.
It's a fine line, again, it's like, it's OMSI and important, like a science museum type of thing.
Right.
I want to make art, and it's like, it's a fine line.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So at the Beckman too, we also have a virtual reality cube, and we also have MRI scanners. Yeah. And so I took some spaghetti that had been cooked up, and I scanned it in the MRI scanner, and then we took it into the cube, and we got to walk around through a bowl of spaghetti and see all these shapes all around us. We could cut it in different ways and look up and look down, and as we moved, it would change that cut place.
So the bowl, so you saw how they all make the bowl shape, basically, for spaghetti?
Well, we saw how the spaghetti strands were falling on top of each other, wow, and how they were interleaving, and the snake-like structures that were forming.
That's great. It reminds me, I made a piece which never worked out, but I rapid prototyped a hollow shape, a mold of a person, a woman, and I planted specific plants in there on the bottom. So it's basically, she was upside down, feet had a hole, so I could plant something filled with earth, planted it, and the goal was to have it fill, like when you take a flower pot and it's been growing there for a while, and it makes this cool interplay between the boundary condition of the pot and the organic stuff that tries to deal with it. And I wanted to have that dealing with it basically, and then I had guys, micro CT people who could have scanned it, but the plant died because of this toxic rapid prototype stuff. But a very similar idea. You stuff stuff and then 3D scan it.
I'm sure we could arrange for you to
I would love to see
that in the cube. Yeah.
Thanks.
I just wanted to comment really quickly. I come from an artistic background as well, so I'm kind of probably unique for this room actually. And so what I think is really cool about what you're doing is that you're depending on technology a little bit, not completely, but you recognize that things like rapid prototyping, and you said something about scanning in there. I don't know if you're talking about 3D scanning.
Yes, I will.
I get really excited when I see people integrating technology into a creative endeavor like this. I've worked with artists in the past quite a bit through the work that I've done, and so I just I recognize that, and I see, I get really excited when I see like 3D modeling something, and then you don't end up with that in the end. You end up with something different, but I just think that's a very intelligent way to work. So I just wanted to say that out loud. I've been thinking it the whole way.
It goes in the direction of what I said. It's to make a sculpture in the computer and then print it out and display that art. I have not seen one that did that well.
Yeah, right. That's that doesn't work, right? Like you said,
maybe intriguing, but
like you said, you rapid prototype the flower pot holder and then it killed the plant, right?
Well,
I mean,
well, the rapid prototype was the pot basically.
Yeah.
And then the plant just would die in there because it's kind of like this.
So I would love to talk some more about this.
Sure.
Actually.
Yeah. Let's exchange information. Cool.
One of the things people do with rapid prototyping, if there are lots of things people use that for, where the material that the machine creates it lacks the physical properties of the final thing that they're after. And so one of the things they did, even going back a few years, you can rapid prototype something and then dissect it, cut it up into smaller pieces, put those into a sand casting or a mold or something, and then you can actually make it out of molten metal, steel, or whatever.
There are many ways.
Yeah.
There's a cool way where they sinter stainless steel powder and then dip it into molten bronze and then it wicks it up basically.
Oh, that's
and there's
interesting.
even cooler techniques, but it's expensive, but it's a really high resolution where they take a laser and go directly into like titanium powder or you name it powder, and then have to micron resolution can do stuff in 3D. All sorts of cool things, but they're really expensive.
As soon as you say titanium, I think even titanium dust is expensive.
Oh yeah. And that's probably the cheapest part about it.
I also like the comment you said about the idea you had with the museum installation with the candle, because that reminds me some of the more compelling images that the scientists in Klaus's group have made, in my opinion, lately, were ones where the background or the surroundings of the scene, when they're trying to make something that's contains some artistic content rather than just being purely, display of the scientific fact, so to speak. When they make more artistic-looking images that contain a blurred-out context, the biological context of whatever that protein's normal environment is. For whatever reason, I find that much more compelling to look at than one that just has a colorful background that has no other detail.
It's like the Buckyball too in the trees. It's not a piece. It's really the whole holistic thing. That's what's so nice about art. It forces us to not divide subject and object. It does. Otherwise, we can't even enjoy it.
But to illustrate what John just said, so literally the scientists asked him, maybe it wasn't even his idea to suggest it, but then they really wanted it and did something good with it, is to switch on the light inside the protein. For example, the enzyme is an active site. You switch on a light there, and then you see it illuminated, as if somebody lives there and is just at home by the fireplace. And that makes it, of course, it draws attention, you see more detail, it makes it very natural. And so even in a purely technical circumstance in which we live, like we are getting money from NIH for doing serious work, none of this artistic stuff here. And but it's still very, very helpful. So it could well be that there is not only science trying to talk to you, maybe you pick up something. It might well be that science picks up something from you and integrates it into making the understanding, the illustration of scientific models and situations more natural and more intuitive for humans.
I've already inspired a shoe designer with the quantum maze. So I got a free work boots in return.
Oh, very good, very good.
You know what I was going to add to what you said. I think, you know, I write the BMD program that they use to view the molecules, and I have spent a lot of time on implementing computer graphics techniques that try to mimic things that occur in the real world with the physical, like a model that you would hold in your hands, you know, to give them shadows, to give them visual cues that you have with the physical model. Now, these things don't happen in a tiny little molecule. You don't. That isn't the reality that molecule is in. They are purely there to assist the researcher with their perception of what the computer is trying to show them. And I would argue that those things are very much sort of artistically motivated. They're you know, the molecule isn't that color in the real world. It isn't this, it isn't that, it isn't the other, but it does help the scientist perceive what the computer is showing them. And there's something about the way that artists think, I think, that takes advantage of the way our brains are wired. Whether I don't have to think about it, I just see those things. It requires less effort for me to understand the 3D structure when those things are there than when they're not, even though they might have been sort of artistically motivated.
And one of the most powerful parts of our brain is the visual brain.
Yeah.
The visual cortex, here located here, and has loads of nerve cells. Only because we are not learning it in school to use it, we think it's trivial. But in terms of wiring, capacity, use of energy is actually one of the most important units of our brains. And for just because it's free, we are not thinking much of it, but it's really not true. And so, like your art, the program VMD activates those areas of native, natural intelligence of people. But actually, there is one area where scientists really make more and more context in a rapidly increasing curve with art. And this is the area of getting a cover image for your article. So there are journals. And so the scientists will compete by telling the journals, please take a picture from my science that I cover in my article onto the cover. And all the journals did it initially, even when it looks very technical, but then they realize that sometimes they look very good, and they get more readers that way. And that developed quickly into a kind of industry where all the scientists are really trying to tell their story, but in a way that it is also beautiful. So just the science message alone, no, they don't want. They want it also beautiful. And also they really changed a lot the approach. By in the old days they liked technical drawings, and they took our VMD images, almost everyone we sent them, oh great. But today, no computer image. They want something that is more transformed, more more conceptual art, rather than just like technical art that you do with some pushing the buttons on a computer program. And so this is really like this is, for example, where Olga Swinarski, who I mentioned briefly at the beginning, who sort of helps me to get my scientific ideas out. She actually works a lot with the people in our group to get us covers onto the journals, because you really need some judgment that I'm not myself. I need somebody else to do it, to tell me what is really, what is, maybe I would call it good taste, or something like, for example, choice of colors. Like one of the things Olga tells us often is, take your favorite picture, take those colors, and use those colors from one picture for for one thing you want to depict rather than, you know, choose the colors all over the landscape. But anyway, so here is really already a place where we are really brushing shoulders with artistic approaches and ideas and so on. But you are to come back to you with your sculptures. This is of course, you know, really another level, really a level of depth.
Maybe there are cover images in there.
And you cannot put them on the cover, but you can put it in a room.
Yeah, you can take good photos. Taking photos alone is often, some sculptures actually are better on photos.
Then when you see them.
Yeah.
No, but I would really like, we have a few nice pieces of sculpture in Beckman. If you walk around and if you have a chance, you not only Arnold Beckman himself who greets you when you come in, but also we have some interesting pieces of sculpture. And I would love to have one actually in our area that becomes part of the group basically.
Yeah. The three I saw were by mathematicians, all three of them.
They were very mathematical, that's right.
They have all a math background actually. Hella McPherson is in fact a mathematician, but Shiva Grossman also studied math.
Okay.
And Brent Collins I think too.
Okay. Okay, yeah, for that, the sculpture, that's supposed to be a wave function.
Yeah, that's Brent Collins.
Okay. Good. So then we thank you again very, very much for coming.